came out of an agricultural economy, which was France, and they're called the Physiocrats. Wealth came effectively from the sun. That nature accords him as a pure gift. Small amount of energy in and capture a large amount of energy back. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed. Macroeconomics can be found in the Physiocrats as well. Source of wealth comes from nature. This is before the word energy was invented, the first macroeconomic table. Contribution of Canadian to economic science is overwhelmingly important and insufficiently appreciated.
The influential contrarian economist Steve Keen.
Brilliant economist that criticizes much of modern economics.
The research fellow at the Institute for Strategy, Resilience and Security at University College in London.
He is someone that each and every one of us has to listen to, whether we agree or disagree.
Here's Steve Keen.
Well, this is carrying on with the potted 10-minute history of economic thought that I gave Lex at his request here, and I'm starting now to talk about the first school of thought that I think people should learn, and that's the Physiocrats. I actually find interesting a school which went extinct about 250 years ago. That's where I'd like to start from, and they're called the Physiocrats. And the name itself implies where their knowledge came from, because if you go back far enough in history, we didn't do autopsies. But when you started doing autopsies, they found wires, they found tubes, etc., and they started seeing the body as a circulation system, and they applied the same sort of logic to the economy. And they came out of an agricultural economy, which was France, and they saw that the wealth came effectively from the sun. So they saw all wealth comes from, they said the soil, but what they really mean is sun. The soil absorbs the energy of the sun. One seed plants, 1,000 flea seeds come back. There is no surplus. We are simply mining what we can find out of the natural economy. That's where we should have stayed and developed from that forward. So that's a very quick overview of the Physiocrats. Why do I think that they're important? Well, let's take a look at one of the early Physiocrats. This is Hergo. The argument they make, and this is made quite explicitly here, is that what they call the husbandman, which we'd call the farmer these days, is the only one who produces a surplus over the energy input that they put into production. The land pays him directly the price of his labour. Nature does not bargain with him. What she grants is proportioned neither to his wants nor to the price of his days of labour. It is a physical result of the fertility of the soil and the wisdom, far more than the labour, of the means of production. As soon as the labour of the husband produces more than his wants, with the superfluity, and this is the most important point, that nature accords him as a pure gift, over and above the wages of his toil. He can buy with the labour of other people in society, and he can therefore enjoy, beyond his subsistence, a wealth which is independent and disposable, which he has not bought and which he sells. He, therefore, is the sole source of the riches by which the circulation animate all the labours of society. What he's really saying is that the only source of wealth comes from nature. The agents that actually can capture that wealth are those who can put a small amount of energy in and capture a large amount of energy back. Now, this is before the word energy was invented. The word energy was first made up by a British polymath, I think, in 1809 or thereabouts. This is back in the 1700s. It also predates what are known as the laws of thermodynamics. And they are absolutely inescapable and critical laws about the nature of reality, that, to start with the very first one, energy can neither be created nor destroyed. The amount of energy in the universe is a constant, given by conditions that begin with the initiation of the universe. You can change the form of energy, but you can't create energy. And the second law of thermodynamics says that using energy to do work necessarily creates waste. Now, these concepts are only really understood about a century after this author here. And yet, what's fundamentally turning up in the thought of the Physiocrats is that wealth comes as a free gift of nature. That is, nature accords him as a pure gift. Now, that's a level of wisdom that economics, frankly, has lost, doesn't even have today. All these concepts disappeared because we went to the classical school, and the classical school said that labour was the source of all value. And there's an intriguing detective story that nobody can actually solve, and I'll explain why in a moment. Because if we take a look at Adam Smith, and most people see Smith as the father of economics, this is Smith opening the wealth of nations. The annual labour of every nation is the fund which originally supplies it with all the necessaries and conveniences of life which it annually consumes. In other words, labour is the source of value, about 30 years before this was written, 30 or 40 years, but it was translated into English only about 15 years before. Another one of the Physiocrats, Candlon, wrote this paragraph, and take a good look. Land is the source. Land is the source or matter from which all wealth is drawn. Man's labour provides the form of its production, and wealth in itself is nothing but the food, conveniences, and pleasures of life. Now, if you see some similarity between those lines, okay? Food, conveniences, and pleasures of life. Back over to Smith here. Necessaries and conveniences of life. I'd like to accuse him of plagiarism, but we can never know that because Smith actually told to destroy all his notes on his death. So we don't actually know what he read, what he wrote about what he read, and so on. But the similarity here, the annual labour of every nation over here, land is the source or matter. I think that's one of the most critically wrong turning points in the history of economics, because in terms of the laws of physics, which as much as economists might think they're free of physics, they can't define the laws of thermodynamics. And this statement by the Physiocrats is correct. Land is the source of matter, meaning fundamentally energy that falls on land, the sun's energy that enables us to put one seed in the ground and 1,000 seeds grow out of that single seed. That is the free gift of nature. Now, what Smith is doing here, unconsciously, I believe, is saying, oh, it's what we do inside the production system that generates that wealth, labour combined with capital, etc., etc. So we went backwards by going from the Physiocrats who saw land and the free gift of nature, if I can find that from Hergo over here, that nature accords as a free gift, seeing that as the source of value, to seeing labour as the source of value. And that led to a quarter of a millennium of arguments between economists about whether labour or capital, or labour and capital combined are the source of value. Neither of them are. What is the source of wealth is what we find for free in nature. So that alone is a major reason to regard the Physiocrats as extremely important. But the thing most people know about the Physiocrats, which is equally important, is this called the tableau économique. And this was something drafted by Quinet, and this comes out of the discovery that the body, doing autopsies, finding there are cables and wires and circulation systems. This now sees a circulation system between the agricultural sector, the industrial sector, and the owners of both, because we're talking ancient France here. And it's rather hard to follow what the logic is, but this is fundamentally the first macroeconomic table. And we didn't really have macroeconomics for another century after Quinet until Marx started working in terms of what he called reproduction schema, which predate Keynes by about 60 or 70 years. So the beginning of macroeconomics can be found in the Physiocrats as well. Now let's just, I'm going to try to explain what's going on here, but not using this flowchart system here. You can find some very good intellectual papers on what this table actually means. Phillips, or the Phillips curve, gave an excellent explanation in the Quarterly Journal of Economics way back in, where he got there, 1955. That's what we're taking a look at. And you also have Ronald Meek, Meek here, doing a similar thing in 1960, explaining the tableau économique. The person that I recommended that people should read if they wish to get a strong logical understanding of economics from a non-economist, from a mathematician. This is back to the book from Blatt that I mentioned in the previous video. And here he goes through saying how important the tableau économique was. And again, talking about being a physician, looking at the flow of blood, looking at circulation, and as a result of that produced the tableau économique. And this is just to give an idea of what Blatt thinks as a mathematician. Thinks of Quinet's work. He said the contribution of Quinet to economic science is overwhelmingly important and insufficiently appreciated. So the real leap that we actually went backwards from after Quinet was to get an understanding of the macroeconomy and input-output dynamics, and then we went back at all the squabbling over microeconomics later. So what I'm going to try to do here is explain in a different format, rather more an input-output table, of what's both unique and what's wrong with the Physiocrats. So this is looking, again, very similar to the tableau itself. I've just got two sectors, one sector producing corn and the other sector producing iron. Corn has a net output. In other words, you put in, you sow 70 bushels of corn, you get 100 out. you need 10 of those bushels to produce iron, so your total consumption of corn is 80, but your output is 100, so you have a net output of 20. Now, the mistake they made, and this is a mistake, is to say that the same thing can't happen in manufacturing. So what they see is iron is needed to produce corn, iron is needed to produce iron as well. You have a total inputs of iron of 100, your output of iron is 100, you have no net output. Now that's a mistake, but that's the logic they had at the time. So what you can then say is, well, your net output of corn is 25%. You put a total of 80 in, you get 20 out, your gross is 100, your net is 20, so your net divided by your input is 20 over 80 or 25%. Now the reason there's macroeconomics contained in here is that it also shows the argument that if you have a small increase in your productivity, you can have a large increase in your output. So this second system down here says, well, what if there's another manufacturing technique, and this just might involve putting cats inside a warehouse to stop corn being eaten, that you go from needing 70 units of corn to produce 100 units to 60 units of corn to produce 100 units. Well, that's what you do. You go from total inputs drops from 80 to 70. Your total output remains the same, but your net output goes from 20 to 30. Your change in inputs, you've had a 13% fall in your inputs. You've gone from inputs of 80 of corn to inputs of 70, but your output's gone up by 50%. So that type of dynamic is the beginning of input-output analysis, macroeconomics, a sort of form of a multiplier and so on, turning up in the system. And that's one reason that Keynes is so far ahead, so far out afield compared to the people who came before him and the people who came after him. But the main reason that I think we should start from the Physiocrats is the wisdom that is shown here. This is back to Hergo again. The knowledge that nature accords us humans, not just the husbandmen, the free gift of energy. We find that. We didn't create coal. We didn't create oil. We didn't create uranium. It's all there in nature, and we can exploit it. And by exploiting that, it takes some energy from us to capture that energy, but that is the fundamental source of the wealth of the nations that we accept today comes out of that and not out of labour or capital on their own, which is the sort of nonsense that neoclassicals gave us. If you want to learn 50 years plus of real economics from me in only 7 weeks, go to apply.stevecoonfree.com. If you qualify, you can attend my lectures, ask me questions personally every week, and interact with a great group of like-minded people.